Good afternoon and welcome, folks, to the resource release for the key findings from the Sustainable Business Network's 2020 Plastic Packaging Masterclass. Thank you for your time this afternoon. We're going to be with you for about an hour and we're just going to be unloading the knowledge and the guidance that we've gained from our last run of masterclasses, in which around about 50 organisations, including the 50 we had last year. So all in all, about 100 organisations have input to this material. And it's really good stuff. It's the sort of stuff that every business needs to be interested in, because plastics and packaging, of course, are everywhere, and the systems that we're looking at run all the way from your choice of coffee cup all the way to where you put your where we're going to put our recycling facilities around the country. And we've got that unique thing in New Zealand that we're a remote set of islands in the middle of the Pacific. So how can we run these systems to create a circular economy for packaging in New Zealand, where these materials are never left to pollute or to become waste? So we're going to move for about an hour. We've got a set of speakers for you. First off is going to be Kate Haselhoff from the Sustainable Business Network. She has led the work to create these outputs, and we'll be picking out the detail for you and highlighting some of the top pieces of guidance. And then Liz Butcher from the Ministry of the Environment, Kelly McClean from Foodstuffs New Zealand, Jemma McCowan and Victoria English from New Zealand King Salmon, and Barbara Nebel from thinkstep. And Liz is going to be telling us a little bit about where the government's at and what the next steps are there. Kelly will talk obviously about the large scale stuff Foodstuffs are doing and how they're working with their suppliers. Jemma and Victoria are going to look at the New Zealand King Salmon from partly the elements of export and how they're changing their packaging over time. And Barbara Nebel from thinkstep is going to take a design and data look at the issues, because that's something we really need to grapple with. Each speaker is going to speak for about 8 minutes, after which we'll have our usual Q&A. Normal rules apply. Please pump your questions into the Q&A box. And if you can be clear and concise, that'd be great, because I'll be reading them as I speak, and we'll try and put them as many as we can in front of our panel. Finally, just a great thanks to our partners, Foodstuffs, New Zealand King Salmon and thinkstep, all of whom have supported us all the way through this process, and none of it would be possible without that kind of support. So without further ado, I'll bring up Kate Haselhoff from SBN, who's going to run us through some of the processes that have been behind this process and some of the findings that we've had. Kate.
Kia ora, thanks Andy. Kia ora tātou, ko te mata timonga, ko tuki tuki te awa, no ahuriri aho, ko Hasselhoff toku whānau, ko Kate toku ingoa. Kia ora. Kia ora everyone, I'm Kate Hasselhoff. I am a Projects and Partnerships Manager at the Sustainable Business Network, and I lead SBN's work on plastics and packaging. I'm just going to share my screen. Great, hopefully you can all see that. Now, if you're anything like me, images like this have become a little bit immune to. That doesn't make the situation any less dire or even any less devastating for our environment. By 2050, they're estimating that there's going to be more plastics in our ocean than fish by weight, and the plastics industry will consume 20% of total oil production and 15% of our annual global carbon budget. So SBN have been doing a lot of work to try and combat this. It started in 2018 when China said, we're not going to take your plastic waste anymore. And we heard back from our network, what are we going to do about plastic packaging? So SBN set out on the mission of investigating New Zealand's plastic packaging system and kind of diagnose what it would take to transition to a circular economy for plastic packaging. This led us to talking to a lot of great stakeholders who are doing a lot of work in this space. But what we kind of figured is that there wasn't a coordinated approach. People weren't talking to each other and there were some communication barriers. So that manifested itself in our 2019 Masterclass series, where we had 3 sessions touching on circulate, innovate and eliminate, which I'll talk a little bit more on later. But basically we brought together all the key stakeholders from across the system, or representatives from them, and kind of aimed to break down some of the communication barriers and challenges and brainstorm on the challenges that the system was facing. This produced a great report, which we released in early 2020, and that had some great responses, but we knew that there was more work to be done. And then a global pandemic came, and that highlighted the important role that plastics do play in keeping our food safe and other products safe as well. So we decided to reconvene at the end of 2020 with a similar great group of stakeholders, but we expanded a little bit to having 50 organisations involved, and that's the work that we're going to discuss today. Cool. So SBN uses an action framework from the New Plastics Economy Global Commitment by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. Their commitment is that 100% of plastic packaging will be reusable, recyclable, or compostable in practice and at scale by 2025. And how they see us getting there is by adopting these 3 things you can see on the screen. We want to eliminate the plastics that we don't need. We want to innovate to make sure that the plastics that we do need are reusable, recyclable, or compostable. And we want to circulate and keep all plastics items in high value circulation in the economy and out of our environment. Great, so as I said earlier, we had our 2020 Plastic Masterclass where we brought together those key stakeholders, and the resource that we're releasing today is a really great explanation of what happened during that session. It provides a really nice update from the system with key points from the speakers that presented, as well as a government update and all of the great work that they're doing, which Liz will talk about a little bit later. There's a snapshot of where we're at in 2020. So in our 2019 Masterclass series, we drafted up a bit of a pathway forward for New Zealand to reach those 2025 commitments. And so this snapshot shows what's been achieved so far, what we're still working on, and what's still to come. There's also a section on recycling and what works at curbside collection in terms of materials. And there's a summary of discussions that we held during the masterclass around some specific challenges. Those are the need for good data and decision making around packaging, the opportunity for reusable solutions, how to tackle the challenge of flexible packaging, as well as an update on compostable packaging and what's happening in that space. There's also some great case studies from brands that are doing some really good mahi in the plastic packaging space, as well as some links to some awesome resources to assist you in your packaging decision making. On the screen there, you can find the link to that resource, but I'm sure it'll also be sent out post-webinar as well. Right, so I've got a bit of a list of thank yous to make. Firstly, thank you to our network and our partners in this program, New Zealand King Salmon, Foodstuffs, and ThinkStep. Couldn't have done this work without you, so huge recognition there. Also to Mark's Design, who helped us make this resource as visually appealing as it is, as well as the attendees and speakers of Masterclass 2020. Cool, well that's it from me as a bit of context setting. I don't want to give too much away before we hear from our speakers today, so back to you, Andy.
Great stuff, thank you so much, awesome. Yeah. I'm going to unmute myself, sorry. It's going to be a big piece of work and there's a lot in there, but definitely worth going through the detail because we really put the work into workshop during those periods. It was amazing to see people turn up and really get to grips with the issues. So you can go through there and find a heck of a lot of great information. Fantastic, we'll skip straight on to Liz Butcher from the Ministry for the Environment. Liz is going to give us an update of government initiatives addressing plastic packaging. And once again, just a quick reminder to say, chuck in your quick questions to the Q&A box.
Kia ora koutou. My name is Liz Butcher. I'm a Senior Policy Analyst at the Ministry for the Environment, and I'm part of our Waste and Resource Efficiency Division. My role is specifically around supporting our plastics work programme. Some of you may already be familiar with the work that we have underway at the moment as part of our plastics work program or as part of our broader waste work program, but I'll give a very short overview or recap of where we've come from before I provide a short update on where we are at with our work and what the next steps are. So in December 2019, the Prime Minister's Chief Science Advisor released the Rethinking Plastics report, which took a really broad look at plastics across its life cycle, and it made around 51 recommendations across a range of different sectors and over 6 key themes. Many of the recommendations that are included in the report are already underway as part of our existing work program, and these include things like work to increase and expand the waste disposal levy, design of a container return scheme, investment in more recycling infrastructure, investigating options for standardising curbside systems across the country, regulated product stewardship, and lastly, regulations to better manage the import and export of low-valued mixed plastic waste for recycling. So a key priority for 2021 for the Ministry for the Environment is to progress the recommendations under the Rethinking Plastics report. And this includes the work that we kicked off last year around looking at some potential further phase outs of different plastic types and items. So just moving on to the next slide. Cool. So back in August last year, the Ministry released a consultation document that included 2 proposals. The first proposal was around some proposed phase outs of certain hard to recycle plastics, including some PVC, some polystyrene, and all oxo-degradable plastic products. The second proposal was around some phase outs of further single-use items. We included 7 potential items in the list of proposed items that we could phase out. And this was following on from the success of the plastic shopping bag ban, which came into effect in July 2019. So consultation closed in December last year, and we received around 8,000 submissions. So what are we doing now? We are working really hard to analyse all of those submissions. There's lots to do. So a big thank you to everyone who did put a submission into the consultation. We understand that a lot of work goes into responding to these sorts of consultations, but your feedback is really important, and it's really valuable for us to help shape the final policy recommendations. Broadly, so far, we've seen a lot of support for further action in the space and for some of the proposed phase outs. The submissions do include a lot of really rich and detailed information, and this really highlights the breadth and the complexity within the proposals and some of the unique properties and functions that different plastics offer us. Yeah, we are aware that phasing out some of the proposed materials and items is difficult, while others might be a little bit more straightforward. And we're considering the full suite of feedback that we received as we develop those final policy recommendations. As part of that, we'll also be following up with some of the submitters over the next few weeks, where we want to ask a few more questions and dive a little bit deeper into some of the information that we've been provided with. So as next steps, we are currently working towards producing a full summary of the submissions, which will be publicly available towards the middle of the year. And we're also expecting to be making policy decisions around this time too. In addition to the work around the plastic phase outs, we are also progressing work on a national plastics action plan. So in August last year, the government released an official response to the Rethinking Plastics report. And in this response, the government agreed to investigate the majority of the recommendations that were included in the report, with the key one being the development of a national plastics action plan. It also included commitments to undertake some new actions related to how we improve our plastics data, research and innovation, behaviour change, how we can leverage our international connections, as well as support our neighbours in the Pacific, and looking at how we best support sectors and businesses with guidance, as well as increase citizen science. So next steps are to develop the final action plan and to continue to progress the new actions under the plan. As part of this, we're also considering how the plan will align with a revised version of the waste strategy, which the Ministry is also working on this year as well. So to conclude, we have lots of work to do. We have a growing plastics work program, and this is complemented by a large and ambitious wider waste and resource efficiency work program as well. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Liz. Really good to see the momentum building for the government action around this issue, and things are moving pretty fast. So, you know, for businesses out there, it's important to make sure you're up with the play. And now's your chance, right here, right now, to ask questions of Liz and directly of the government, if you like, to see what's what and what comes next for you, and question those decisions if you choose to. Thanks very much. And on that data issue, we'll go back to Barbara Nebel, who is going to be next up for thinkstep, and she's going to look closely at the need for good data in decision making, because one of the things that we've struggled with over time is simply not knowing how the system is operating and how much plastic is whizzing around our system at any given time and where it all ends up. Barbara, thanks very much for joining us. We'll just wait for Barbara to press a few buttons in the background. I'm sure that's going to work. I did see her earlier. I know she's here. Just to say, after Barbara, we'll also have, we're obviously going to move on to Kelly McClean from Foodstuffs. There's Barbara. She's got lovely colour things behind her with the SDGs. Barbara, take it away.
Thank you. Thanks, Andy. So the role of data. Well, data can be pretty dry, so I just thought I will give you a bit of a case study to show that the results driven by data can often be a bit different than what we think they are. Before I talk about that, we've met quite a few of you, and there is more than just me at thinkstep. We're a group of about 30 working with lots of different businesses around the packaging industry, but also food industry all across Australia and New Zealand, and have a very strong focus on life cycle thinking. I don't want to talk too much about what we do, rather what good data can do. So when we talk about data, we usually talk about data along the full life cycle and not just about one stage of a product, because a product can have a really low impact when it comes to the initial resource use, but could potentially have a very high impact when it comes to waste or emissions related to disposal or possibly to transport. So it's really important to look at that full life cycle. And because I have talked about that before, I just thought I'd really talk you through one of our case studies that has recently been released. We did a full comparison of quite a few different packaging options. From cartons, you can guess who it is, even if you can't read the small writing here. Yes, it was with Tetrapak. Compared it with PET bottles, with recycled PET, with recycled HDPE bottles, with pouches, aluminium cans, cans from tin plate and steel, glass, and glass jars, and also quite a lot of different sizes of packaging options. Tried to be really comprehensive and did what we said before. We've looked at the full life cycle, right from raw material production, manufacturing, transport, when it comes to the forming, sterilization, filling, all the stages right through to end of life. And have looked also, you see that little tree up there, raw materials. We've got biogenic carbon coming in, so we've also looked at that coming out at the other end. And we have looked at carbon, because it is one indicator. We have also looked at all the other environmental indicators, emissions to water, emissions to air, but also the use of plastic and the amount of plastic used. We have taken recycling scenarios into account, and the results, cartons actually come out with the lowest carbon footprint. And that has to do with a lot of the consumer pack, but also has to do with some of the shipping, because cartons just are light and they don't take up a lot of material themselves. So here you have a snapshot of the results. you can see that we looked at New Zealand and Australian scenarios. And again, that's why data is important, because not all things are equal in different locations. We have different grid mixes, for example. And that would be one of the reasons why the results between Australia and New Zealand are quite different. We also had slightly different recycling recycling rates in both countries. So those have been also taken into account. As I said, this is just the carbon side of things. We also looked at the weight and the plastic content. The weight is an interesting one, because if we had, for example, heavy bottles on a truck, it will cause not only more fuel use, but it will, if we think that through, and I have to admit our study did not go quite that far, it will lead to more tire use, so more particulate emissions from tire use, which is quite an environmental problem. So generally speaking, the lighter something is, the better. So that's why we have weight here as one of the indicators. We have those results here, and you go, oh, well, I'm not entirely sure what is all behind it. So we have summarized those in a nutshell, 4-page document, really easy to read. And for all of those who really love data, Tetrapak have actually made the full report available, all 169 pages of it, with lots of data in it. So it's possible to actually dive in and really see what all the results were, what drives the results, so that you can actually make decisions based on data. Because the results often are, as I said, possibly not quite what we expect right at the beginning. The report, because it is a comparative report, has also been peer-reviewed by 3 independent experts who come from a range of packaging experts as well as life cycle assessment experts, to really make sure the results are robust. And if you do want to read more, they're all available on our website, and I'm quite happy to send the link out to SBN as well. And there's more to come. So we also have done a study, which hopefully is released in the next week or so, on different courier bag options. And I was asked not to share the results with you just yet, but also they might not be what we expect. But again, it's all driven on data and looking at quite a lot of different options and indicators. And that's just my little case study for today.
Thanks very much, Barbara. That's perfect. And it's really interesting to see the level of detail that we need to get to make really sensible decisions. And it makes you think, you know, we probably should have been doing this for some decades previous to the now, but the second best time to do it is right now. And that's one of the things, one of the major recommendations in the report as it goes is to, you know, for businesses to do an audit of their own packaging use and start to think really carefully about that, how that impacts, because that will also help flow into data across the whole of the system, if at least the businesses know what it is they are and aren't using at this stage. Thank you, Barbara. We'll bring you back for the Q&A. I'm sure there'll be questions on that one, which we will get to shortly. But before we do, I'll just bring back Kelly McClean from Foodstuffs New Zealand. She's going to talk to us about tackling the flexible packaging challenge, one of the nuttier, more difficult areas we came to during the workshops around this, the flexibles, the soft packaging, what to do with that, where it goes next. Kelly, thanks very much for your help.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Andy. Cool. I'll just share my screen as well. Cool. 1 minute. Okay, can you guys see that? So I'm actually talking about collaborating on change. So I work at Foodstuffs New Zealand. I'm the New Zealand, I'm the Sustainable Packaging Project Manager. And it's been wonderful partnering with the SBN team and working with Kate on these masterclasses. And then being able to share these resources is really great as well. So I really encourage you all on the call to read through them. Check out the links. There's some really great detail and resources in that way. And yeah, so I really love this mahi. Through the masterclass program, SBN's provided a really safe space for industry policymakers and innovators to share and learn from each other. So in the afternoon, I was helping facilitate the data session. So it's actually been really cool to get up to speed on the other breakout sessions that happened at the same time. So I just wanted to note that after attending all the masterclasses from 2019, I think that that conversation has really evolved from one around what options do we have to what is actually best practice. From we have to make a change to making sure that there's no unintended consequences. And now this discussion should be extended beyond plastic and encompass behaviour, product and wider systems change, moving from that what question to the how. So I'm now delighted to provide a window into Foodstuffs packaging sustainability program, share a couple of examples, business to consumer and also business to business, around change work and also some key learnings from our end. So here we go. Right, so a bit of background. So Foodstuffs is a New Zealand cooperative, which means that every New World Pack and Save and Foursquare store is New Zealand owned and operated. We have about 30,000 Kiwis working in the Foodstuffs network, and there's about 400 stores, big and small. So one of our Here for New Zealand goals under the Sustainability Leadership Promise is to improve our packaging sustainability. And I'm fortunate to lead a work program with some highly motivated and talented people from across the business. And so just wanted to give a big shout out to them because their work's so important. So Foodstuffs has signed up to the New Zealand Plastic Packaging Declaration and is committed to 100% reusable, recyclable and compostable packaging by 2025 and earlier. So to help us on this road, we have 10 guiding principles that we use internally, and we've also shared these externally. Cool, so just to note, when you look through those 10, reduction and reuse is highly prioritised, and then we move into material selection and then other aspects of great importance as well, and these are reviewed annually. So the 5 transition areas we have that we're working on actively are around our in-store packaging, our private label packaging that we sell to people, to Kiwis, supplier packaging, and the packaging in our supply chains and logistics. So yeah, so we really have made some considerable progress internally, upskilling staff, and I've been involved with that over the last couple of years. It's been absolute delight. And developing best practice, so we as a company can actually make some better informed decisions across a lot of different areas. And the full principles that you see on the left there are actually available on the Foodstuffs Supplier Exchange. So I can send out a link to that after this. But getting into some case studies, I've got a couple to share with you today. So the first one's a business to consumer example, food in the nude. It's also got a bit of B2B in there as well. So our, our food in the nude strategy is in 36 out of 42 New Worlds in the South Island, which is a really awesome feat. We're really proud to get to this point, and what the aim of it is removing unnecessary plastic packaging from the fresh produce to create a more sustainable offering that's vibrant for consumers, for customers, for Kiwis, and it's a really good example of systems change. So the wonderful team, including Glenn Stevenson, Rossi Ray and Justin Dykoff, in collaboration with our private label team and suppliers, have been able to make these changes so loose produce can be provided where possible. So food in the nude is achieved through, sorry, get some water. It's achieved through innovative vertical misting units that ensure produce hydration and quality are maintained. We also have to collaborate really closely with suppliers to eliminate the plastic sleeves where we can. And so we've also been able to implement reusable crates as well throughout the supply chain. So the produce departments, they work really, really closely to make sure that they've got the right amount of ordering coming into stores, and their sharp focus is really on getting it as quickly to the customer as possible. And through that process, 54 prepackaged lines have been culled where they don't align with that vision from that team. So it's been quite a big process. It's been something we've been working on for about 4 years. And popular produce lines such as spring onions, celery, silver beet and spinach are harvested and tagged, and that includes important information like the barcode, their name, and then that's transported to our distribution centres or direct to store in reusable crates. And then these crates then sent back, and then that kind of creates a closed loop without needing cardboard boxes. And there's about 70,000 of these crates circulating for PAMS products alone in the South Island. And through this initiative, we've been able to remove 3.4 tonnes of plastic packaging over the period of the year. So customers can get behind this by using their reusable produce bags. And yeah, we're really looking forward to seeing where else we can use reusable crates in particular as well within our supply chains. Cool. And then the second example I wanted to share, and it's a little bit of an update from the masterclass from last year, but this is something that often people don't see, but it's it's a great example of being able to make a big impact by tonnage through some great innovation and also some great clever thinking internally by the staff. So the first piece around this is pallet wrap reduction. So we've been able to team up with our supplier, Universal Packaging, and get a much better product that we use in our DCs, and that's been able to reduce our volume of pallet wrap that's used every year by 205 tonnes. That's quite massive. So it's basically doing the same job, but you need less to do that job. That pallet wrap's then recycled by our waste providers. But I just wanted to share this next step, and that's around reusable pallet wrap by Green Spider. And initial discussions started in 2019, where we worked through a few different options. And some benefits with this include faster wrapping and unloading and cost savings. So it's pretty exciting. We've focused first on internal loops, so within that store level, and it's just, yeah, a really exciting process. Cool. So just reiterating the key learnings over the past year that I did share with the SBN Masterclass. If you're wanting to move into that elimination mindset, it's a team sport. So it's that collaboration between retailers, suppliers, supply chain, and customers. All of those parts matter, and it really matters around behaviour change as well within those areas too. So the system really matters. Rethinking product design in particular, and the delivery of that product's really, really powerful. And just starting, so you have to start somewhere, and then you have to build and curate from there. And knowing what's unacceptable, so problematic packaging would be a good example of that. Also being really aware of unintended consequences, so these can be avoided. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for tuning in. That's just given a couple of examples of what we're working on in Foodstuffs, but there's so much that's on, so yeah, feel free to get in touch. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kelly. Sorry, I sold you a dud there. I read the wrong bit of my sheet. Of course, you're all talking about collaboration in your business, and fantastic to see it there. And I know that the customer experience is fantastic as well. I love walking up to a set of vegetables with the mist coming down. It's a lovely, lovely experience. And to see all the stuff that's going in the background as well with the big ticket items like the plastic wrap around the pallets is really, really important. We're getting an absolute avalanche of questions, which is fantastic. Do not stop them coming. They're brilliant. It will take me a wee while just to kind of get them sort of collated and try and get them in front of our people for the Q&A, which we'll do on the hoof in just a moment. But first, I will hand you over to Jemma, McCowan and Victoria English from New Zealand King Salmon, who are indeed looking at the soft plastics challenge for us, and particularly how that runs for their business, which of course is across New Zealand, but also to export. Jemma, Victoria, thank you.
Well, good afternoon from Nelson. We're really pleased to be here. I'm Jemma McCowan, and I've got Victoria English next to me. I look after brands and sustainability, and Victoria is our new product development manager here at New Zealand King Salmon. So I was reflecting on why do we sponsor this forum over the years as New Zealand King Salmon, and just hearing Kelly and her case study just before and seeing Victoria scribbling down NanoWrap there, is a really good example of great collaboration, great inspiration, and what the SBN do to set such a great vibe in this community to inspire, educate, and just help us keep going forward is really amazing. So thank you for that. And for us, it's you know, we're on a bit of a mission here at New Zealand King Salmon to lead our industry in aquaculture, because we really believe that aquaculture has a future to contribute for New Zealand in our sustainability mission overall. And we're doing all sorts of things, and that might be better environmental outcomes in our farming, reducing waste, looking after the water around us, 100% usage of our salmon product, but plastic packaging and packaging overall is really close to our hearts. So it makes sense to sponsor a forum where industry comes together to solve problems together, and it works for us, it helps us move forward as well. The tricky thing for us, it's not easy. Packaging plays such a functional role in keeping our products safe and delicious, and salmon is highly perishable, and we need all those functional benefits. So we feel like we've come a long way in the years since this group is set up, and when I look at the overall results and what we're doing today in this forum, it's amazing how far we've come. So we're pleased to share that journey and help overcome the barriers and stay positive together. And one of the things I've noticed over the years is that you get to bring on new champions and invite new leaders into the sustainability mission to keep inspiring and keep things going and develop substreams of work. And that's really exciting for me. And so on that note, I'm about to introduce Victoria, who's taken the lead and been a real star for us in taking on this packaging sustainability work. So she's going to talk about that. She's already got a busy job leading our innovation generally, but she's taken on the stream of work in our sustainability space as well by chairing our plastics and packaging committee, by setting up goals and plans, and reporting on our progress. Sometimes that's one SKU at a time, and it can seem like an endless pathway. But as we celebrate more wins and track our progress, we've made inroads, we know we have, and I encourage you all to take that journey one step at a time. We'll never really get there, the journey will continue, but we'll definitely get better and better along the way. So thanks again, SBN, for continuing to inspire and encourage us all through these sorts of forums. So Victoria.
Thanks, Jemma. Good afternoon, everyone. As Jemma alluded to, we meet every 6 weeks, our Plastic Packaging Sustainability Group. And the impetus for this was the signing of the Macarthur Foundation New Plastics Economy Global Commitment. And it's amazing how making a commitment with hundreds of other well-known companies and brands really drives progress. At the start of 2019, we roadmapped where our efforts needed to be from 2019 to 2025. Firstly, we needed to know how much packaging we were using. We had no idea. In order to have that baseline, we implemented a software system that records packaging weight of every packaging item that we consume. And we record that so that we can have a monthly report, and we can monitor packaging usage and where to put our efforts into next. We were able to start using this in July 2020. The first packaging items that we tackled, they were not flexible packaging, but instead we wanted to replace some of our non-recyclables with known recyclables. For example, our traditional semi-rigid bottom web material was replaced with a plantic, which is a cornstarch plus PET material that is recyclable under resin code 1. Previously, the material had been resin code 7. We also removed a material which is unrecyclable and soon to be banned in New Zealand. And although we only used it in small amounts, the result was that we will send 63 kilos less petroleum-based plastic to landfill every year. And the material that we are now using is 30% plant-based, and the remainder of it can be recycled. However, our journey has not been a whirlwind roadie of successful stops, high-fiving because we've got from A to B before Google Maps said that we would, comparatively changing our packaging before we've done our due diligence. Instead, our journey has been about carefully selecting materials for shelf life, matching or exceeding our current shelf life, technical ability, making sure it does what our current material does now. We address questions like, do we lose the easy peel function? Does the portion slip down in the pack when it's on hang cell, leaving an unsightly oily smear on the pack? The material makeup. Where has the material come from? Is it produced in New Zealand? What is its recyclability or compostability claims? How is it treated at end of life? And what can our messaging be around that? Cost. Is there a cost increase or decrease? End user consideration. Will it be a retail customer or a food service customer that ultimately has to dispose of their packaging? What access do they have to soft plastics recycling, specifically for flexible packaging? We are very proud of the fact that we produce an incredibly nutritious, tasty, healthy, and valuable superfood, but we must make sure that it's packaged so that it reaches our consumers in the best possible condition and presentation, and with adequate shelf life. We also know that our products can be oily and messy, and people cannot be bothered cleaning flexible packaging for soft plastics recycling. And also not everyone has access to soft plastics recycling. And with that in mind, we have worked with our suppliers and an independent packaging specialist throughout 2019 to investigate down gauging of the flexible packaging webs, compostable pouches, and now in 2021, we're working on a flexible bottom web roll stock film for packaging that holds our salmon products. In addition to looking at product packaging, we have picked some low-hanging fruit, such as the elimination of plastic interleave from our food service Reusable packs. This will save the company close to $10,000 in material costs per annum and 58.5 metres cubed of 58,000 metres cubed of plastic per year going into the environment. So you can see the picture on the left, there's two trays of salmon. One on the left has got plastic interleave and the other does not. And traditionally we put a plastic interleave in for our food service customers so that they could just grab one end, pull the plastic, and all the slices would be individual, easy to take off and easy to present. The suggestion came from a staff member that we remove it, and we did some trials and convinced our food service sales team that it was the right thing to do, and they were fully and wholly on board with that, and so we were able to make that change. Another initiative that came from a staff member in our factory was to eliminate from a factory process. You can see on the picture that there's some salmon portions, and they're sitting on top of other salmon. And the reason for doing this was to stop the scales from the skin sticking onto the portion. Customers do not like random salmon scales on their otherwise nice, clean, pristine salmon, and therefore by simply putting portions skin to skin and portion to portion, we were able to eliminate the plastic sheet, a saving per annum of $7,500 and 936 kilos of plastic going to landfill. We know that 2025 is approaching fast, and we would love to reach our goal of 100% reusable, compostable, or recyclable by then, which is why we are working very hard to get some of these goals over the line.
I think we may have lost Jemma and Victoria down there. I'll see if they spring back to life for us. If not, we'll bring them back into the Q&A at least. They're pressing their buttons, saying that. Jemma, can you hear us?
Yes.
No.
Something
Good
happened
stuff.
with the connection there, sorry. And so Victoria was just winding up, so I hope you heard most of that.
Good stuff. Should we hold it there and bring you back for the Q&A?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Lovely job. Thank you so much for your time and for speaking to us today. And we'll bring you back for the Q&A. That was Jemma and Victoria from New Zealand King Salmon, and a fantastic case study, a kind of a model of what we need to do in these industries, because they've got a tough product. It's not an easy one to keep fresh, and they're offshoring it. So it's got pretty much all the challenges in a nutshell. So that it's fantastic that they're working, they're pioneering ahead for us and learning as they go and sharing that learning, which of course is crucial. So that's our presenters today. What I'm going to do is bring them all back into the room for our Q&A. We have a ton of questions to get through. It's clear that there's a lot of very interested folk watching this right now, which is great. So I'll whiz through as fast as I can and get as much as we can. But also remember, of course, we'll be addressing these questions further with you through the continuing masterclasses running into next year. We'll talk a little bit more about that right at the end. Liz, I'll come to you first, because we've got a number of questions, obviously, for you folks over in government. One of them was, can you give any update on the consumer deposit scheme, how that might be shaping up and where those parameters might be set?
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yep. Loud and clear.
Okay. So there's been no decision yet made about implementation of a container return scheme. We will be providing advice in 2021 to ministers around the project outcomes from the container return scheme design project, and then subject to that decision and agreement on next steps, any decision to implement a scheme would likely involve public consultation later on as well.
Sure thing. Fantastic. And follow up to that is, how much direct support do you think the ministries are going to be looking to give towards reusable packaging? Is there sort of funds going to be available for development or anything along those lines?
That's not something that we have, I guess, a clear answer on yet, but reusables and reuse is definitely something that we're talking about and thinking about how we best support kind of that move higher up the waste hierarchy.
Oh, good stuff. And also around, does the Plastic Action Plan also take in some of the larger items, the big commercial items like the large cans, the jerry cans, the sort of the backroom stuff, as well as consumables?
So the action plan is based on the Rethinking Plastics report, which looked at plastics across a really broad range of sectors. And so it won't be focused on specific items necessarily or specific products, but it will look at different sectors, including commercial, C&D, aquaculture. But there's a lot in that report. So it's really just starting to scratch the surface as we begin to even move through the first few recommendations.
Sure thing. Is there anything on the scale of kind of the reusable bag ban that, what's next off the list that people should be looking out for that might have quite a big impact, do you think?
Next off the list in terms of regulation?
Yeah, probably the regulation side, what they might suddenly have to go, oh, I can't do that anymore.
So as I discussed earlier, we had a consultation last year on some further proposed phase outs. That's probably the next ones to look out for, although no decisions have been made around that. We're still considering all of the feedback that came through consultation. In terms of other regulations within the action plan, it captures a lot of our existing work program, things like the waste disposal levy and increasing and expanding the waste disposal levy, which decisions were made about by Cabinet last year. So there'll be regulations that will be coming down the pipeline to implement some of those decisions that have already been made.
Do you get a feel for how fast that pipeline is going to run, the sort of timeframes people are looking at?
For what one?
I suppose we kind of line it up with our 2025 kind of pencil mark, and how radical you think the shift might be by then.
Sure. So in our consultation document last year, we proposed that regulations around plastic packaging would come into effect between now and 2025. For some items that might be really achievable, for others that might be even 2025 might be challenging. So we need to give that some really careful thought. In terms of things like plastic packaging, product stewardship, as many of you all know, plastic packaging was declared as a priority product under the Waste Minimisation Act last year. There's a 3-year time period from that declaration for a scheme to be co-designed as well.
Oh, good stuff. So the message is the bus is leaving. If your business is not already on it, then get on it fast, and we can certainly help with that. Barbara, I wanted to come to you because predictably the Tetrapak LCA has set up a firestorm of questions across our question and answers. The key one seems to be around kind of how to balance the assessment in terms of carbon against the assessment in terms of waste or recyclability, because of course Tetrapaks are notoriously hard to recycle. How do you broach that one? What's your kind of take on that? Oh, you're muted.
I think it's really important that we recognize that there are a number of factors that we take into account. And I think it's almost not really possible to say this is more important than that. I mean, do I want to save the polar bears or the turtles? We really want both, right? So I think it is whatever you set as your priorities, you need the information on each of those subjects. And then people can make informed decision. And that is really what it is all about. To not narrow the topic down to one that is possibly currently talked about most. And I don't know if that is plastic or carbon. So the information on both really is important to have data on both. And then you can make informed decisions. So I wouldn't want to say one is more important than the other.
Is there going to be a follow-up in terms of sort of energy use and compostability with Tetrapak, do you know?
Well, energy use is included as well. Energy use was one of the factors.
And is that from the compostability angle as well, that was taken on, like end of life?
End of life was also included. So we have taken into account, yes, it does go to landfill, and at landfill there will be some carbon emissions because of the biogenic material, and that has all been factored in.
So
and they are looking at more recycling options too.
Right, good on them, good stuff. Fantastic. I just wanted to, and also, is there a place to sort of trade that off against a reuse model as well? Was there reuse models placed inside that system?
In this study, we have not looked at reuse models. Certainly, that would be really interesting to do. You'd then have to take into account the transport, the washing, of course, less material use. So, yeah.
And if people want to do a kind of, I don't know, like a quick and dirty or a simple LCA approach to some of their materials, is there a way of doing that? Are there resources online that we could share that they could kind of take a quick snapshot? Or do you really have to go deep to get the right answers?
I mean, you can look for generic emission factors that are out there. I don't know a free tool to do carbon footprint of products right now. There are a number of packaging LCA calculators. If you do want to do like a public comparison, like Tetrapak did, you really have to go into the detail. If you want to do it in-house to do some quick decision making, there are really good tools out there that can be used by businesses. And I know of one organization, they've used one of our calculators in-house, and they've run hundreds of scenarios on different packaging options because it is an easy to use tool. So that definitely is possible.
Oh, fantastic. And we'll try and share as many of those resources as we can for our masterclass as we go forward. Kelly, I'll just come to you because there's a few questions for you as well. One would be about, are you looking at kind of mandatory carbon emissions, like information on packaging? Is that something that's possible or doable at this stage?
At the moment, our carbon footprint work is at quite a big level, looking at operations in general. So waste is part of that, but it would be the waste that goes and is managed by the stores and by DCs, so within our system. For packaging, kind of carrying on from what Barbara said, when you are having to make some decisions around how to navigate this space, which materials to use, how does reuse fit into that, shelf life extension, all those kinds of things. These are trade-offs that you have to take into account. So carbon would be part of that. There's some really great published information around general material types that you can like get more informed around general trends around carbon footprint of packaging. But I think it's just really important for the food sector anyway, that packaging is quite a small part of the carbon footprint in comparison to what's actually produced or the food that needs to be consumed. So, you know, packaging does have a role there for protection and for shelf life extension. For food in the nude in particular, that process took so long to get to where we're at now because our system had to change to support that change for the certain lines where it could change as well. So we haven't been able to change everything because there would be a trade-off there with the carbon footprint of the actual product that would potentially not last as long. So there's a lot of different things to weigh up, and I think Barbara sort of made a few good points there.
Yeah, sure thing. There's still a lot of complexity out there. Is it something that are you going to take another look at Tetrapaks now that you've got the extra info?
I've read through the report, and you know, it is very focused on carbon. I think you know, I am quite involved with the Life Cycle Association of New Zealand, and was involved with writing the CE report, which sort of linked in life cycle assessment with life cycle thinking. And so, you know, my view is that circularity does need to be taken into account, and it's one of those factors. And actually, it would have been really great to see some more information around reuse models, because what was looked at was a single use model. And I think, you know, you change some of that goal and scope and it would come up with quite a different sort of set of outcomes. But on that particular one, it was really great to see all that amazing data, have it peer reviewed. But I would have, really liked to see a bit more understanding around the recycling of Tetra Paks are really challenging in New Zealand, and within our masterclass work program, you know, we haven't actually gone there because it's kind of lumped into some of that laminated stuff, mixed materials. So, so I think that's possibly an area to look at actually this year as a group.
Sure thing. And NanoWrap, that got a lot of interest, not just Jemma scribbling away on a pad, but also other people online perking their ears up. How's that gone? And is that a local product? Tell us a little more. Yeah,
so NanoWrap's been developed in conjunction with a supplier, Universal Packaging. So what they've done is sort of redesigned the wrap so it uses less materials, and so it's, you know, got essentially less, as far as I understand, less material used on the inside, and so it's sort of, you know, able to reduce that weight by 30%. So for a single use option, it's incredibly amazing to get that level of reduction by volume, what our stores and DCs are having to sort of manage out the back. But moving into a reuse model for pallet wrap's really exciting, and there's lots of different designs of pallet wrap, reusable pallet wrap out there. And I'd say if there's any suppliers interested in that space, really try to understand, you know, your internal system, give it a go and see what works best for your storage. There's some great benefits, such as being able to access boxes without having to unwrap everything and rewrap it. So that's a really obvious one. And there's time savings and efficiencies as well. So
this is a fantastic thing, isn't it? When we start to grapple with these big issues, we actually unlock quite a lot of other little solutions as well, because we just take a much closer look at things, which is
and you have to start somewhere as well.
Absolutely, that's it. And that's one of the things we've really pushed hard on in these masterclasses, that, you know, allow people to try things in a sort of safe environment, give them as much information as possible, and encourage people rather than sort of throwing rocks at each other. I think that's absolutely perfect. I was going to go to Jemma at King Salmon. The mix, you were talking about a mixed plant PTE, and it went to number 1 plastics. That's a really great transition. How is that going through the MRFs? Does that just go through as is the old systems and works fine?
Victoria,
sorry.
So those that do have optical readers will read it as a PET.
Right.
And we have the ARL recycle symbol imprinted into the tray for those operations that don't have optical sorters, which is a lot of those around the country.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, that's a good example as well of like the system rising to meet the innovation, because the recycling facilities are getting to the stage where they can be more selective and we can put a bit more through them, but it's getting that pace matched, isn't it? So we're not ahead of ourselves and we're not putting stuff through that can't be dealt with. One of the things that came up was how much can we reuse plastic waste? I mean, kind of anyone could kind of answer this one. How much do you think we could kind of be drilling back out and reusing that we're not currently reusing? Is that something people are looking at? I'll look at Kate.
I think, yeah, I've just, I'm muting myself, but I think, you know, you'd be crazy not to be considering recycled content, where it's safe and where you can incorporate it into packaging. So that's, you know, being able to actually use what is hopefully going into this infrastructure that needs demand. But yeah, I mean, there's other products that can be made, durable products that can be made out of packaging. I think, you know, possibly that's that cascade effect where it might be used for food packaging and then turned into something else. A good example of that's PP plastic, where you know, it's used for really good reasons around you know, food production, hot fill and really tight seal and all those kinds of reasons. But then it can be made into durable products. So yeah, incorporating recycled content is super important. When you're in a big, you know, organization like Foodstuffs, having recycled content in your procurement policies are really important as well. So there's opportunities.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to that as well. I think that there's a massive opportunity for reusing plastics and going for a more rigid form of plastics, but that investigation needs to kind of happen at a larger scale for us to understand, I guess, materials that are suitable for reuse and washing.
Perfect. In terms of I'm going to raise the tangled web of compostables at this point and see where we're at with that. I know that we in the report we've got the advice that, you know, the overall advice is not now, although there are pioneers working in spaces and they, you know, very carefully working through what they're doing. Is there work going on behind the scenes still in the compostable area, and how is that coming forward? Do you know?
Yeah, absolutely. So compostable packaging does face a number of challenges at the moment as a, you know, for a national solution. We've got things like no agreed standards for compostable packaging. There's no agreed certifications. And what that means is that we're seeing some items entering the market that may state that they're compostable, but may not actually break down in people's home compost bins. However, that being said, there's a lot of work by some really great brands, but also the Packaging Forum Working Group on how we overcome those challenges at a national level. So if you're interested in compostable packaging and understanding what's going on there, read our resource, because it states a good update of what's going on, as well as get in touch with the Packaging Forum's working group on this, as they're doing a couple of surveys and some research into proper use case for compostable packaging.
There you go, chapter and verse. But that's something we'll still keep looking at, because there's a lot of innovations bubbling forward. Kelly, I'm sure you receive a few emails every month of, I've got this fantastic new thing, it's made of such and such. Is that something that's quite difficult for you to grapple with still, or do you feel now that you've got quite a good grip on the sort of decision-making processes that we've been developing?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. So I think just in general, the space kind of evolved a bit quicker than it was ready for. So that means certification wasn't quite there. The infrastructure is very limited in New Zealand, and, you know, as a policy, we've really approached it to set the bar quite high. So our expectation is for suppliers to be able to provide home compostable certification that's third-party verified. We've been able to incorporate that into our regulations team. So, so that means that NPD, you know, the packaging claims are looked at as well, which has been really useful. So that's been in the last 18 months probably. But just to answer your question, I think we just have to think of the waste hierarchy, and it's really, really important to focus on that reduction, reformulation. There might be a new way of being able to deliver a product where you're actually reducing the need for packaging, at the same time reducing potentially water transportation as well. So there might be some really great options out there if we kind of move up the hierarchy a bit. And there are some really great use case examples for compostables. I'm not trying to knock it back because I am a huge fan of bio-based materials, and they would be where they're sort of, you know, aligned with food waste, and being able to go into that sort of genuine composting stream. We just have to remember with compostables, what comes out the other end is soil, and so you have to make sure that, you know, what's going into a composting system is safe as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's the element as well about being nutritious and actually adding some value there. I know that there's a lot of work going on the contracts for the for food waste, the curbside, especially around Auckland. So that's something that they'll be looking at technically. We know the man himself, and he's doing a lot of work. So it'll be fantastic to see when that happens. I'm just going to point back to New Zealand King Salmon. I was just interested because obviously you're seeing an international level to this as well. How do you find the feedback to some of the changes you've made out there in export markets and kind of the other innovations you're coming to in regulations? How's this playing out for those that want to get their stuff offshore?
You want to take that, or?
It's an interesting question. It's certainly one of the things that we take into consideration when we're looking at materials. We find that some markets are more in tune with packaging and what they're requiring than others. For example, we're just starting to send our product into the European market. And the UK in particular are very interested in what packaging items we're using. So the impetus has come from them to us about, well, hey, what are you using? And they've been very open about giving us feedback about what the steer is for us and what has worked for them in the past and what some of their, for example, retailers such as Marks and Spencer, what the expectations are. So I think it just depends on the market. Yeah.
And I guess primarily we've talked today about initiatives concerning our retail smoked salmon products, which are we're growing our export of those products, but our primary export is our whole fish under the Ora King brand. And so we've tackled the issue of polystyrene predominantly through the Ora King brand, although there are still some spots where we need to tackle it into Japan and China, where they're more interested in having a long shelf life on their products and being able to use that polybox again in the market and so on. And they've got habits about putting ice in and punching holes in polyboxes that is hard to change. But we've worked primarily on understanding how we can move forward in the sustainability space on that whole fish and moving towards more cardboard boxes and solutions that are more not only economic but efficient to freight, so we're not putting so much pressure on the system from a sea freight or air freight perspective.
Fantastic. And that's interesting that just those little details of like what some people do on the shop floor can affect the whole system, and you have to kind of react and respond to that. And
yeah, you've really got to know your customer, particularly when you have a long supply chain, because we're discovering this re-icing practice in the US we didn't know about at the moment and working through that. Whereas, you know, when we learned that in the wet market, in Fiji fish market in Tokyo, that, you know, the guys come up with a big, and they are all guys, by the way, a big steel, and they punch a hole in the polybox, and then they put the ice in, and then the water that comes off that leaks out. Now, when you do that with a cardboard box, it all goes pear-shaped. So you learn very fast when boxes disintegrate around whole fish.
Yeah, and that underlines that the kind of central theme for today. Think first, act later. You know, rather than put the change in, find out first what it might be. Thank you all for your time. That's fantastic. We've come to the end of the Q&A now. I just want to pass back briefly to Kate to summarise a little bit more about the report itself and our processes, and then we'll just quickly come back for a goodbye. Kate.
Awesome, thanks Andy. Yeah, go out and check out our resource. It's a really great summary of kind of where we were at the end of 2020, and also I think the most up-to-date details at present. A couple of things that weren't touched on today that I just wanted to make sure that we communicated out is that in terms of data for a brand wanting to make packaging decisions, your first step is to do a packaging audit. Understand what you've got, where it is. It could be, you know, in your supply chain, or it could be the packaging going out to the consumer, but really identify what you've got so that you can make strategic decisions about how you're going to tackle your plastics problems. And to do that, you need to identify what of your packaging is actually problematic, and we've got some good information on that in this resource. From there, eliminate, get rid of any unnecessary packaging. Unnecessary packaging is just bad design, in my opinion. So really try and hone in on what's actually needed for the functional purposes of your product. From there, I urge everyone to check out Reusables and see if they can set up, you know, new innovative reusable systems. It would be awesome to see us all moving further up the waste hierarchy. There's some excellent examples of brands in New Zealand that are using reusable packaging examples and refilling things. New World has a great example of the bring your own container to the deli. You've got EcoStore, they're setting up fantastic refill stations in a lot of retailers across the country. So yeah, go and check out the resource for some more great examples around reuse. And then, yeah, we touched on compostables. So the next thing I've got is what's next? Where is SBN going from here? Well, we have decided to go bigger and better in 2021. And instead of having a focus on just plastic packaging, which we have for the past couple of years, we're looking to bring in all material formats for packaging. And that's just because we realize that, you know, we've got all of this great information now about what's kind of happening in plastics, and we're heading towards best case scenarios for plastic packaging, but how do they compare to other packaging formats like aluminium, like glass, and fiber, because each of those other options have really great benefits, but also have their own set of challenges as well. So looking forward to expanding into that. And we're also expanding in the amount of people that can get involved. So if you're interested in coming along, you can go and register at the link on screen. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you there. Thanks again to all of the wonderful speakers today, to our sponsors, New Zealand King Salmon, Foodstuffs and ThinkStep. And finally to our network. We couldn't do it without our beautiful network. They give us the platform to be able to create these kinds of resources and share the information broadly to help systems change in New Zealand. Kia ora.
Thank you, Kate. Perfect. And just to say that our next Sustainable Business Network event will be the launch of the Climate Action Toolkit for small and medium-sized enterprises. That will be a really useful to-do guide for you guys that can get to reduce your own greenhouse gas emissions in simple and easy ways. So check that out. To find out more about this and all of our work, please go to sustainable.org.nz. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.